You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestel. During the mid-1990s, one little town in Scotland became the epicentre of UFO mania as the world's media descended upon Bonnybridge. Hundreds of sightings saw the residents and their council come together to demand an inquiry by the British Prime Minister at the time, John Major. 30 years on, Malcolm Robinson and his co-author Ron Halliday combine their extensive knowledge and investigations of these cases in their new book, The Bonnybridge UFO Enigma. But before we join Malcolm, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed releases, bonus content, and more. Thank you to my latest patron, Paul R., and thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support the show with your contributions. It is greatly appreciated. Mysteries and Monsters is across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters YouTube channel. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news and episodes. Our exclusive merchandise site is available through TeePublic, and you will find the link in the show notes. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you to Dean Bestel for his wonderful artwork, and the show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. Scotland is our destination now, in the company of our good friend, Mr. Malcolm Robinson. In the early 1990s, the town of Bonnybridge in Scotland hit the headlines around the world as hundreds of residents had encounters and sightings that they just couldn't explain. This culminated in a petition being delivered to the British government, demanding an inquiry which once again fell on deaf ears. In their latest book, Malcolm Robinson and Ron Halliday have left no stone unturned in collating a comprehensive review of the Bonnybridge UFO Enigma. Malcolm, welcome back, my friend.
It's a pleasure to be back on your show, Paul. Thank you very much for having me back.
It is. As I sit here speaking with you today, it's quite apt, this, Malcolm. Obviously, as we were chatting before we started, I've just come back from a lovely little trip to Berwick-upon-Tweed in the northeast and visited a couple of places that have been on my visiting list for quite a long time, Chillingham Castle and Lindisfarne.
Okay.
And on the Thursday evening, we'd got this beautiful B&B, Malcolm, smack on the seafront. So we were literally like 100 yards away from the sea. Beautiful reclining chairs, big windows, and we were sat there just watching the sea as you do on holiday and seeing all the ships passing by in the North Sea as we were. And the stars started to come out, we were watching, and then all of a sudden, a bright ball of light just appeared and started traversing across the sky. And at first I thought, well, is that a star that's just become uncovered by the clouds? But we suddenly realised it was beginning to sort of move past fixed objects of the stars as they were. I mentioned it to my partner. She got up to try and turn the light off and grab a phone to start recording it. And as soon as we pulled the camera up to do it, it just went pop and vanished. And I just sat there and chuckled to myself, Malcolm, because I thought that's absolutely typical. It must have been there for like 10, 15 seconds. And as soon as we went to start recording it, it just popped out of existence. It didn't disappear behind a cloud, wasn't a star. Checked the flight tracker that I've got, wasn't a plane, wasn't a satellite. But it was literally the very second we went, look at that, right, let's go, gone.
Isn't that just typical? I mean, that's just so gimmicky, the type of thing that happens to many, many people when they're looking at what they believe is a UFO in the sky. They reach for the camera and then bang, it goes, and it's just bizarre why that should happen. But maybe they're aware it's their presence is being recorded, who knows?
Absolutely. And then I just put it down on one of those, that's a bit strange, Malcolm. But obviously these days I've got so many apps on my phone, I can quickly cross-check everything and make sure I'm not, misunderstanding something or whatever. Because you've got to be aware these days. And like I say, I checked flight trackers, satellite trackers. No, nothing.
It's so
So, yes.
you have those apps on your phone, more so if you're a ufologist, as you just to purely check things, because the skeptics will ask you, could it have been an aircraft, this, that, and the other, and if you can readily, quickly jump on your phone and check that, then obviously that's a great benefit to anybody. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, well, I've been quite aware of it because I got caught out last year because I saw something just flying across the horizon here in Sheffield. And I thought, what the bloody hell is that? And I filmed it, and I thought, blimey, and it was really travelling.
Yeah.
And so obviously, and as you do in these moments, I thought, right, I'll send this straight away to Paul Sinclair. And he just went, right. He said, give me a minute. Checked it. He went, oh yeah, it's the ISS. And I was so annoyed with myself because I've seen the ISS before, Malcolm.
Yeah.
But it just threw me because it was quite low, and I've never seen it seemingly travel that fast.
Yeah.
So it just shows you should always cross-check everything before you sort of think, at last, another proper sighting.
Well, good for you. I mean, obviously, getting back to the ISS, that sadly is a bane of many ufologists, because that does comprise a number of false UFO reports, and it looks so amazing, it looks so beautiful as it traverses the night sky. And again, getting back to the trackers and stuff like that, then you can find out for sure if that's indeed what it was. So well done.
Yeah. So, as I said in the introduction, Malcolm, here we are. Yourself and Ron have created this incredible volume of work in regards to what we would probably say is Britain's most regular place that seems to have a whole raft of sightings that have been going back decades, really. And I think this is one of those perfect examples of a case that, for whatever reason, in the mid-90s, Malcolm, this was everywhere on British telly. I remember seeing it on ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, but even the BBC, for goodness sakes, getting me up before 9 a.m. to see you talking about this on breakfast telly in 1997, Malcolm.
That's great.
Everybody seemed to be really interested in this. And it's quite interesting as well in regards to, you've got a lot of these clips on your YouTube channel, which is a remarkable little trip back in time. And it makes me chuckle because you can see some of the stuff that you're doing sort of 92, 93, Malcolm.
Yeah.
And they're using the Twilight Zone theme in a lot of them.
Yeah.
By 96, 97, they've suddenly started using the X-Files theme in all of them. And it shows you just how quickly and widespread this kind of interest in ufology crossed over, really, in the 90s, primarily because of a lot of cultural touch points. And yet people will say, oh, well, it's all over now, it's finished. And this is the thing about Bonnybridge. It burned really brightly in that period. And as with anything, the media always gets very quickly bored and moves on to something. And obviously a lot of the major channels have stepped away from Fortean phenomena for quite a while. Obviously, recently they've started coming back, the BBC especially. When you look back at this, Malcolm, is it frustrating that people still view this as, oh, well, it was a bit of a flap in the early 90s and that's it?
To some degree it does, I mean, they're not denying that people were genuinely witnessing some strange aerial objects in the Stirlingshire skies, because it wasn't just primarily a Bonnybridge phenomena, of course. It was subjected to various towns and villages in the Stirlingshire region, like Larbert, obviously the major town was Falkirk, Slamanan, Shield Hill, and it encompassed quite a wide area of Central Belt. And you're quite right, back in the early days, 1992 to probably 1996, myself, Councillor Billy Buchanan and members of the SPI were we couldn't believe the amount of media coverage that was ongoing. Quite rightly so, because there were a genuine concern going on, And many a TV show we did, and you're quite right, I remember it now, they played all that silly music, Twilight Zone and the X-Files and stuff. But that's what they do, they don't know any better. Let's jazz it up, let's give it a wee bit of arms and legs and stuff. But it was a wonderful, wonderful time for me, and it was a big part of my life, Paul, and it was just great to be involved with this subject. And it wasn't a million miles away from where I lived at the time. I lived in a small town of Tullibody in Clackmannanshire, and Bonnybridge was only, 10 miles or so away from me. So I was boots on the ground, so to speak. It was close by, and it was great to be involved with the whole Bonnybridge saga, yeah.
I suppose it's one of those things that people look at what was going on in Bonnybridge, and like you say, the area seemed to have a history of this anyway, because I think that the neighbouring village of Denny seemed to be experiencing a lot of sightings and sort of throughout the 1980s, Malcolm. But do you think it was just the volume of sightings that were occurring in Bonnybridge at the beginning of the 90s? Because obviously it just seemed to explode. Like you say, I mean, obviously Councillor Buchanan became sort of synonymous with the phenomena, and appeared on television shows. Very honest, genuine person, a man who really wanted to help his constituents with whatever was going on. The fact that this then morphed into dealing with UFO reports, Malcolm, is remarkable. And not many councillors or members of parliament would have treated this as fairly and as balanced as he did. With your experience, the amount of time you spent with Billy, why do you think that was? Do you think he was just a genuinely caring person who was the prime example of what a councillor should be, regardless of the subject matter? He was an open door for any concerns of the residents.
Well, thank you for saying so, because that's exactly what he was. He was an honest-to-goodness man, and he was a man of the people, and he was elected to serve the people of Bonnybridge in any way, shape or form. Admittedly, he did not expect people to be knocking on his door saying, "Look, I've seen something strange in the sky. Can you find out, what it is?" In Bonnybridge. And Councillor Buchanan, rather than chase him away, as I said, he was elected to serve, so he had to deal with them. He had to deal with his constituents. And by golly, he's took a lot of abuse from fellow councillors in the Falkirk district and other people. But as I say, he's to be commended for the sterling work that he did. How it came about for me, Paul, was I was listening to Central FM, which was a radio station in central Scotland, and it was speaking about these UFOs, and Councillor Buchanan was on it. So I quickly got in touch with Jane Barry, the radio host, and she put me in touch with Billy, and Billy was so glad to speak to somebody who actually dealt with this subject on a professional basis. So he was over the moon, if you excuse the pun, and he thought it was great. So him and I set out on a two-men crusade to try and get some answers. And like anything with any given UFO sighting, we all know the scenario, Paul. You got to dot the I's, cross the T's. And what I mean by that is you got to check with the local police to see if any members of the public have been reporting their sightings. Did they fall in the same time of sighting that you have? You have to check with the Ministry of Defence to see if there were any air exercises ongoing. Needless to say, you check with the local airports like Cumbernauld, the national airports, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Prestwick, etc., to see if they had any flights in the vicinity of a given sighting. We check with local flying clubs, etc., and the meteorological stations and offices were there any launchy weather balloons. If we don't tick the boxes, the sceptics will say, well, you didn't do your job very well, you didn't check. So needless to say, that was always a priority, Paul. We always had to dot those I's, cross the T's. And the vast majority of given sightings anywhere in the world have natural explanations. We know that. But There was a small percent flitting across the Scottish skies that defied explanation at that time and probably still do. And But to be there at the time, it was just a wonderful, wonderful situation, plus we had all the conferences and the television, etc. Yeah, it was crazy.
I suppose, obviously, that initial report that you'd heard, because then you were invited to go on there and talk about it, Malcolm. Were you, even with your experience of what's gone on and the cases you've dealt with throughout your career, were you surprised at the volume of reports that you started getting? Because obviously this is sort of the birth of all this, and in regards to you were being sent stories. You know, this is the wonderful thing about that particular era. You'd get letters, or people would try and speak to Billy about this, because obviously this is where you were introduced to Billy and you started your sort of relationship in regards to this. Was it a little bit surprising it wasn't just one or two people who'd seen something strange? Because this is the thing about Bonnybridge. We're not talking about a few sightings. We're talking hundreds, if not thousands, of sightings over a 30 to 40 year period that are still going on until this day.
Yeah, the sightings have diminished. I don't think the people of Stirlingshire and Bonnybridge as a whole are that bothered to report them these days, you know, because not only did Billy get ridiculed, but the town got ridiculed, you know. And when anybody in Great Britain talks about Bonnybridge, oh, is that daft UFO place? You know, it's got that affiliation, for want of a better word. And but to answer your point about the sightings, yeah, I mean, it was crazy because I was comfortable in the early 1990s, between 1992 and the late 1993, of roughly about 200 sightings that I honestly felt were legit and real. But sadly, as usual, when the media get hold of that, more so that the big dailies, the Scottish national newspapers, they add an extra zero to that 200. So it now becomes 2,000, you know. And we were accused of, Billy and I were accused of hyping up the whole scenario. If it wasn't for Billy and I, there wouldn't be a Bonnybridge phenomena. And that is absolutely outrageous, because we were there to categorise, document the sightings, and it was the media who put an extra zero on any given sighting that we gave them, any number that we gave them. And it was quite frustrating, Paul, because, people then sometimes didn't really want to come to us and tell us what they saw. And I've always said, in any UFO sighting anywhere in the world, if 5 people are looking at this sighting, maybe only one will come forward and say, I'm going to report that. The other 4 who saw it as well say, no, not me. Why not? I don't want ridicule. So not just in Bonnybridge, but anywhere in the world, we are losing out on a number of, I believe, genuine UFO sightings simply because of the fear factor, the ridicule factor. They don't want to come forward, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is the thing, because you only have to look at some of the articles that were written at the time, some of the segments that were done on TV, because it was everywhere for a while. Malcolm, it was on, as I say, BBC Breakfast Television. I mean, there's some shows I've never even been aware of, because obviously they weren't in my local region here in Yorkshire. I mean, I was watching one of your clips recently that was from a show called Strike that was on Carlton, which I think was more to do with the Midlands TV, which is a programme I'd never heard of, Malcolm. And they had some very strange choices in regards to the accompanying music for that particular segment. I don't know whether they'd only got one piece of classical music they could do, but it had seriously didn't have anything.
It was actually not a bad show, that one. I remember you're referring to. It wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
I think that was in the days when I wore a dodgy moustache, you know.
Yes, indeed, sir. But listen, I'm not here to criticise how anybody looked in the mid-90s, speaking from personal choices, Malcolm.
But yeah, I mean, that moustache fell off one day as I was walking down the street.
It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. You could handle a moustache, Malcolm. You were all right, my friend. But it did. It seemed to be everywhere. And like I said, the fact that the BBC covered it, because obviously you were on regional news a lot, obviously both for the independent ITV local stations and also BBC Scotland. And so for it to cross over and reach that point, I mean, I remember seeing people who had come from Japan to film this, who were doing documentaries, Malcolm, back in those days. And I think the guy who'd come over, the lead guy, who was quite fluent in English, which was surprising sometimes when you deal with people from abroad. he was on about receiving letters and correspondence from other UFO groups, which I would imagine was one of those where it was kind of these wonderful sort of fanzines and mail shots that groups would do, Malcolm, because whilst it's only 33 years ago, there was no other way to let people know other than, if you're going to send somebody a telegram, you'd write them a letter or send them a pamphlet.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. I mean, in those days, the early 1990s, internet truly hadn't really hit the world, so to speak. And it's fair to say that I was writing letters to the airports, letters to the police. And, it was just unbelievable. Whereas these days, you can send emails all over the world. But I think probably when you're talking about the Japanese, when the Japanese came to Scotland, that was in 1993. And we held a big meeting at the Norwood Hotel in Bonnybridge, and it was absolutely packed to the gunnels. And I gave a short presentation, and people were coming forward, and that's where we really, truly got a handle on how big this subject was, because it wasn't just the odd one or two people coming to you. There were dozens of people walking up saying they'd seen things. Now, of course, not everything they've seen may be a bona fide UFO. It may have been an aircraft misidentified, of course. But it was solid. People coming up, lines of people coming up to Billy and I to tell us their tales. And Yunichi Yao, who was the Japanese director, he was obviously documenting all this and filmed. We took him for about 4 days. We were all round central Scotland, filming people, interviewing people, and he promised to send me a disc of that finished programme, but I'm still waiting. Sadly, I never got it, and which was a great shame. But the interest as well came from Australia. We had an Australian TV crew come over, and it was quite amusing, Paul, because I don't know if I've mentioned this in the last time I was on your show. Lovely, lovely guy from Australia. Came to my home, set up the tripod camera. We're giving him tea and biscuits and a nice camera crew. And then as soon as that red light went on in the camera, he said, "Right, Mr. Robinson, UFOs over Bonnybridge. What a load of rubbish, don't you think?" Now, he was looking for my reaction, Paul. He was looking for me to get upset and really go for him. But I kindly and calmly said, "Well, that's your opinion. I mean, you're welcomed and entitled to your opinion. But I can believe you me, it's not the case." So he never got the reaction that I mean, I've worked, I'm sure you have as well, Paul, all your life with the media. They can be very nasty sometimes, but equally they can be quite kind and very informative. They can provide you witnesses, etc. So it does work both ways, yeah.
I suppose that was often the thing here. I mean, this is what happens regardless of the phenomena, Malcolm. I think often there will be a presumption on the media's part that the people who are reporting things are idiots or don't understand what's happening. And as you say, one of the early things you did was write to all the local airports, because we have to be brutally honest here. Bonnybridge is under a flight path. There are several major airports in the area. There's a lot of traffic there. Not often between midnight and 6 a.m, as they confirmed in some of their correspondence to you, Malcolm. But as with anywhere, most parts of the United Kingdom are under flight paths, or you see a lot of air traffic. It's the same wherever you go. Sheffield's precisely that. But obviously my brother lives near a Leeds Bradford airport, so you see far more traffic over his house than you would perhaps over here in Sheffield, perhaps. And so obviously a lot of sort of professional media people were working under the presumption, Malcolm, that people in Bonnybridge didn't understand where an airplane or a helicopter was, which was it's one of those things that I think it's gently offensive, because it's saying, oh, these silly people, they're just getting excited about something very mundane.
Yeah, I hear your point there. And that was levelled against the people of Bonnybridge, but by the same token, the people of Bonnybridge are well aware that they're on a flight path to Cumbernauld, Glasgow and Edinburgh airports. And funnily enough, I sent a letter off to Edinburgh Airport during the early 1990s asking if our society, SPI, could, attend the tower and just have a wee chat with them all. Never in a million years thinking they would agree to this. And they did. So myself and members of SPI traipsed up the tower at Edinburgh Airport, and we saw the radar scopes and everything. And I was speaking to one chap, a controller, and I says, "Do you get any anomalous blips come up on your screen that you can't identify?" And he says, "Well, sometimes we do. Mostly they are just weather blips, some problems with the weather. But occasionally we get some strange returns that, we don't know what they are." So I was very, very, very surprised he would open up and say that. And whether he was allowed to say that or there were no supervisors standing near him at the time, so maybe that was why. So it was great to get an opportunity, and I don't know if UFO groups would get that now. Maybe they would, I don't know. But back in 1993, we were there, and we were talking to the supervisors and the radar operators, and some of them laughed and poo-pooed the subject. Of course they did, but that one guy, he was open enough to say, yep, from time to time they do get strange, anomalous returns that they can't explain.
In regards to that, obviously the commercial airports and staff seem to be quite open and engaged in conversation with you and correspondence, Malcolm. Yeah. What was the response from the government and the military in regards to flight paths and plans? I would imagine, were they a little less forthcoming in discussing it on a balanced manner?
Well, obviously Nick Pope was in the UFO seat back in those days. And so again, we're talking letters, and I've got a number of letters. I think there might be one in the book from Nick Pope. And we're asking the questions, with any air traffic in the vicinity. And the usual, and I've said it many times, not just from Nick Pope, but even going forward, the usual tired old statement coming from Whitehall is as follows, never changes, and as this: as these objects do not constitute a threat to the defence of the United Kingdom, the British government will not seek to open up any governmental inquiry. And I've said it before, Paul, that, this is very, very frustrating because some of the people that have seen these UFOs in the Bonnybridge region says, "Malcolm, some of these were so close we could have thrown a stone at." Now, we want transparency. We want honesty. And we know that any government won't give you that in any aspect of life, never mind UFOs. And I know we've got disclosure, and I know NASA's been involved in the Pentagon in the past 4 or 5 years, which is wonderful. We can maybe come to that later. But as far as the British government goes, when they started to drip feed the British public documents under the Freedom of Information Act, and I've said it before, when we saw some of these documents, Paul, and as I've said it before, many of these paragraphs were blacked out, page after page, paragraph after paragraph blacked out. We want to know what's underneath those blacked out paragraphs. It can't all be just somebody's name and address, which obviously you would have to black out, but not paragraph after paragraph. It's my contention, and it always has been, that the British government, if not many governments the world over, know far more than they're letting on. But I'm not so naive and stupid to think that it's all UFOs. Of course it's not. Of course it's not. Many strange things flying in the skies, not just of the United Kingdom, but the world over, are our own technology, are our own black budget technology. That's a fact. And it gets misconstrued by the ground-based observer thinking, wow, look at that. What's that thing? And it goes down as a UFO, and it's probably just a new prototype. In the 50s, the 40s and 50s, moreover, when mankind was getting higher and higher in the sky and going at Mach 4, Mach 5, some of these objects were misconstrued as a UFO, the Blackbird, SR Blackbird. We've got all these different objects in the sky, but here's the kicker. I would not be involved in this subject if I honestly and truly did not believe that we're dealing with something real, something bona fide, that's always, always, always been with us, traversing through the years, possibly in different guises, from the Scandinavian ghost rockets of the 40s through to the present day. So there is something going on. And including your good self, you would not be doing these podcasts if you too did not believe in your heart, well, there's something else amiss here, something else going on here.
Very much so. And I suppose as well, I mean, one of the things that's always struck me about Bonnybridge is that there didn't seem to be a uniformity to what people were seeing, Malcolm. There were balls of light, there were strange shapes, but people started reporting all kinds of craft. You know, they weren't just seeing the typical flying saucers. You had people reporting luminous balls of light, these objects hovering, traversing at incredible speeds. You had triangular-shaped objects. It seemed that they had the whole pantheon of sightings that were covering a wide variety of shapes and sizes.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the subject and the perplexing aspect of the subject, in as much as they weren't just one specific sighting of one kind. You know, people presume it's a proverbial flying saucer, like two soup plates joined rim to rim, which is your classic saucer shape, of course. You're right, it wasn't just that. There were these balls of light, there were cubes, there were triangular shapes. We can mention a few cases as we go on. And even, would you believe, like a Toblerone box, you know, the triangle box, whole length of that was seen by a witness, Andy Swan. And it was like as if it was like had frog's legs. It was jumping about the sky, you know. And so that was a strange one, a Toblerone sized object. So you had all these shapes, and it was just a case of just trying to ascertain what could it be, sit down with a witness. There were a number of witnesses we sat down with, and it was clearly they were very, very misconstrued into thinking what they had seen was a UFO. Because this guy, I forget his name, but he said he sees UFOs on a regular basis. We went out to visit him. We were out his back garden, and he went, after a period of about 10 minutes, he went, look, there's one. It was clearly an aircraft. Now, this guy was not out to pull the wool over our eyes. This guy honestly and truly, firmly believed in his own heart and his own mind that what he was looking at was a UFO at a distance. And we had to inform him that it wasn't, and he got a wee bit upset. And because he says, well, you're meant to believe in this. You're meant to deal with this. Why don't you accept what I'm saying here? And it can be a wee bit serious at times when you give someone an answer and they don't want to hear the answer. You know, people can be so misled, and, you know, it's like a number of things you'll see in the sky. You'll maybe get a cloud that looks like the shape of a horse's head or stuff like that. You know, it's all that kind of stuff. And we have to tread carefully with people like that, because some of them are not deluded. Some of them are just misperceiving what they say, you know?
Absolutely. I think you have to rule out all rational explanations to finally come to a conclusion that perhaps this is something else, Malcolm. You can't just wholeheartedly accept anything, like you say, because more often than not, and as you mentioned earlier, the vast majority of strange things seen in the sky have a rational, down-to-earth explanation. And it's the ones that don't that fascinate us.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, talking about people who can be misled, there was a video sent to me by a lady in England, I won't give her name, and she was quite excited about it, you know, these UFOs just below the clouds and stuff. And when I got sent the video and looked at it, within a matter of seconds, it was clear to see these were just laser lights or searchlights illuminating the low-lying cloud, like a spiral dance. And by golly, it looks fantastic. It looks great, because you don't always see the beam coming up due to weather conditions. You may only see the aftermath of that beam, which is the light under hitting the cloud. And she was none too pleased about my explanation. But the thing is, you know, we've proved it before. It's either a nightclub that's opening up several miles away from where the witnesses are, and they're using searchlights just as a bit of patter, for want of a better word, you know. So we have to be careful, yeah.
I'm surprised that this seems to really catch people out these days, Malcolm. It seemed to be every nightclub that opened in the 1990s used these spotlights on the clouds. And so I know there was something over here last year where loads of people were reporting strange lights in the sky, and I went outside to look towards where people were saying they could see it, and it was clearly that. It was obvious that it was something coming from the ground. And I just thought, why does this surprise people these days? I don't think it's as common as it used to be, certainly not where I live, but like I say, back in the day, it seemed to be every other week there'd be some bugger firing a searchlight up into the clouds, Malcolm.
Yeah, thankfully we never had that in the Bonnybridge area.
Yes.
Certainly not to my knowledge, not of cases of like that. You know, we've had quite a number of strange, bizarre sightings in the Bonnybridge area, which we put on in the book. I mean, I honestly believe that this is the iconic book. It's a definitive book on UFO sightings in the Bonnybridge area. And Ron Halliday and myself, we were working sometimes together, sometimes independently. And I think it was last year I said to Ron, you know, I'm thinking about doing a standalone book about Bonnybridge. But Ron, I would love for you to be part of this. Share your research and let's do it together. And then, you know, make it a definitive book about these sightings. And so he gladly accepted, and we put everything together. And the way the book shapes up, Paul, is I'm sure you've got a copy there, is the first part is written by myself, and then the second part is by Ron. So it's not all nested together. It's how I saw it and how Ron saw it, you know. And it had its challenges. There were a number of strange things that I had to put in the book, which was, you know, when I write a book, I've got to be honest. I must say it as it is. I won't leave anything out, because people will say, you never said that. And so the thing about Zallis, you know, Councillor Buchanan claims that he saw a strange man from another part of the universe come to the Falkirk District Council buildings. And I mean, there's a big story about that. And Billy Buchanan and I fell out. Thank God we made up, but we fell out over that story. And I could have left that out the book. I could have left out the book, but I says, well, the reader must know that this happened as well. And he was almost going to sue me over this falsehood. Having said that, he did claim, admittedly, Billy did claim, that a guy came to the council buildings with all his wonderful, fantastic knowledge of the stars. We found out later the guy's name was Jerry Rogers, and he was going to be speaking at, along with Phyllis Schlemmer, at the Falkirk Town Hall about the UFO sightings. So the full story of that is written into the book. It's something that had to be said.
Well, I think that's often the case, is that if you ignore these kind of things, Malcolm, it takes away from it, because you've got to put it out there, warts and all, because as with anything, there will always be, as I'm sure you are well aware of, and many researchers and cases over the years have had people who have just inserted themselves into phenomenon, who are either desperate for attention, trying to pull a cruel practical joke on people, or simply just barefaced liars who want to be involved.
Yeah, thankfully I've never had that in Bonnybridge. You know, the only thing I did have is, I think I mentioned it before there, was when we were working with the newspapers would write up the story, and then people would say, Malcolm, why did you say that? That's ridiculous. That's terrible. Imagine saying that to the newspapers. I went, I never said that. I never said that. And it's the newspapers put spin on your words. Now, that is the type of thing, Paul, that caused me a lot of heartache during the 90s. Fellow friends, fellow ufologists coming up and accusing me of saying this and saying that. I says, I never, ever said that. And thankfully, some of the interviews I did with the press later on, I recorded to ensure that I would be captured correctly in the written words in the newspaper. And I dare say that the number of researchers listening to this podcast will say, yeah, I know what you're saying, Malcolm, it's happened to me. I've been misquoted in the press, so it does happen.
I suppose, I mean, as you mentioned, that there's a real sort of starting point from this, which is, as you refer to in the book, really the case that started it all, which is the Jim Walker incident, which happened in January 1992, which obviously also pulled Billy into this from that point on as well, Malcolm. This seems to be the starting gate for everything sort of building and eventually bursting forwards, because within a year and a half, the media were covering this, people were coming to visit. You had researchers from all over the world visiting Bonnybridge within about 18 months of Jim Walker's incident. Yeah. Now, obviously, Jim Walker is a pseudonym, but this was clearly, a first-hand encounter at very close proximity.
It was. It was certainly the first reported sighting to Councillor Buchanan. They may well, and I'm sure they are, others before the Jim Walker sighting. That's when it's not on record, so to speak, But before we talk about that sighting, it's fair to say to your good self and your listeners that the Bonnybridge UFO reports didn't necessarily start off in November 1992, because I was dealing with sightings in the Denny area. Denny is a small town near Bonnybridge, and that was in 1982. 10 years before Bonnybridge kicked up into the media, 10 years before I even knew Councillor Billy Buchanan. Yeah. So I was there, I was, dealing it with 10 years before. So it's just funny how it's still in that locality, in that area,
Absolutely. And I think it shows that there was clearly something strange going on in the locality. And people weren't sort of cross-pollinating, because this is often the thing. Well, somebody's heard somebody down the road talk about this and they've decided that they think they've seen something strange. You couldn't say that with Jim Walker's case, because it's clearly, this is not a man misunderstanding an odd light in the sky that could be anything easily explainable.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the Jim Walker sighting was the first sighting that really brought the Bonnybridge Enigma to the world, for want of a better word. And he saw some, I think it was Droves Lone, he saw this triangular pattern of lights, and straight away he knew it wasn't an aircraft or a helicopter or anything like that. And when he knocked on Billy Buchanan's door, Billy, some might say, had the option to tell him to go away, don't be so silly, but yeah. I believe that Billy Buchanan actually knew Jim Walker. He knew him fairly well, and he knew straight away that this wasn't a wind-up. This was something serious. And so Billy Buchanan had to deal with Jim Walker. And when I came on the scene afterwards, that's when we started to find more and more witnesses. Now, admittedly, the reason why and how we found more witnesses, Paul, was we put an advert in the local Falkirk Herald. It's a big newspaper in the area. And that drew forward more witnesses, which we had to go forward with. And it wasn't just a case of interviewing them on audio tape with their permission, of course. It was getting them to fill out UFO sighting account forms, the written word, sign it, etc. Some people wanted to come forward, but look, don't want my real name used. I don't want to, I'll talk to you about it, Malcolm, they said, but I don't want it reported anywhere. So some of the sightings we lost, over the years. We had to use pseudonyms, as we have done in the book. But yeah, certainly Jim Walker. Followed that, I think it was the Sloggett family was the next biggest one.
Yeah.
It was a mother, a daughter and a son were walking on the farmers' fields. It's like moors behind the town of Bonnybridge. You have Bonnybridge and High Bonnybridge. It sits further up, and it's all farmers' fields. And of an evening, they were walking along this little it's just a wee kind of tarmac track, it's not, there are no cars truly go up there. And as they were walking along, they claimed they saw this big ball, a blue ball of light, which came down, initially landed on the road, then landed in a field, a farmer's field next to them, about the size of a basketball, maybe slightly bigger. And then it's the fence, the farmer's fence that surrounded the area, started to vibrate. If some invisible guys had their hands on the wire, shaking the fence, it was vibrating. And at that, this blue ball rose up into the sky and was gone. And as you walked away from the area, they claim that they heard a big growl or a big light came from some nearby woods. So, I mean, I've interviewed the family. They clearly were upset. They wanted answers. I'm in this position where I can't always provide answers because nobody truly knows what's going on. They can speculate. But the Sloggett family clearly was, a family who saw something very bizarre for sure.
I remember reading an account of that incident, and I remember it saying a mother and her 2 children, which kind of gave the impression that they were youngsters, Malcolm, but they weren't, were they? I think both children were in their 20s, so we're talking about 3 adults who happened to be a mother and her daughter and son.
Yeah, that's correct. And some of the recent television broadcasts that I've seen by overseas television recreating the Sloggett family had them as young children as well. So, yeah, it's quite sad. They don't always get it right, but yeah, that was a good one.
Strangely enough, I think that's the programme I saw. I watched a documentary on from Discovery Channel, I think, and it was on about the world's strangest UFO cases, and it had that one in, which I thought was quite surprising because it obviously covered some of the big ones, but it covered that particular incident out of the Bonnybridge cases, and then obviously mentioned about how many others had happened. But that had a mum and sort of 2 10-year-olds with her, and I thought, well, that's not what happened. They were adults.
That's correct. I mean, probably one of the most interesting ones for me in the whole Bonnybridge saga was, of course, the Freddie France sighting. That was quite interesting as well. And what happened there was he was going to collect his wife who was playing bingo, or he was taking his wife to the bingo. He's going to collect his wife at the bingo, in the town of Stirling, which is several miles away from Denny. So he jumped into his car and he travelled along this little B road, and it was fields to the right. And one of his young sons screamed out, Dad, what's that? What's that? And to the left of the car was this hat-shaped object. So you can imagine a bowler hat, but not with a curve, just squared off, flattened off. So 2-tiered, and it had 3 green lights on its underside, and it was hovering over a field to the left-hand side of the vehicle. But this is where it gets so bizarre, because what happened next is very, very strange. Freddie France claims that about 30, 40, 50 feet in front of his car suddenly appeared this like a doorway of mist. It wasn't mist as you would normally think about it. It was a clear edge, sharply defined edge, wispy movements all around us, but it didn't go off the edge. It was sharply defined, just like a door. And it was only on his side of the road. So as the car drove through this misty-like effect, they had like electrostatic feelings all over their body, like pins and needles, pinpricks all over their body. And as he went through this, he didn't stop the car, but his young son screamed out in the background that he could see it flying away towards the town of Grangemouth. And I said to Freddie at the time, at that time I advocated the use of hypnotic regression. It's not the best tool these days. You can lie under hypnosis, we know that. Something known as cryptomnesia you've maybe read as a small boy, and under hypnosis it comes up, and you may think it happened recently and it happened years ago, or something you've read in a book. So, but we never regressed Freddie France, unfortunately. But that was an interesting case, that one.
It was, and I know when I was reading the book, before you even got to it, I thought this really reminds me of another case, which was the Avis family, which happened, I think, was it Hampshire, a couple of years after that? Because theirs is a very strange case, because they sort of entered a strangely coloured bank of fog, and it ended up they'd lost a couple of hours by the ends of it all. It's not something you tend to hear that often. So for him, especially as he had his sons with him as well, it's a very interesting case, because that kind of marks it out as something quite peculiar. Because, I mean, this is the thing about fog. I think when you live somewhere where you either grown up with it, Malcolm, or you live in an area that's prone to it, you can tell fog and what it is compared to mist and things like that. I remember being a kid growing up when the pits were open, and obviously you used to get more fog because the amount of dirt in the air more often than not.
Yeah.
And that's something that doesn't tend to occur very often, especially not where I'm from these days. But you can distinctly tell the difference between something that's so sharply defined as what Freddie Francis explains, because normally a fog bank is just, you can't see the end of it, because more often than not, you can barely see more than 10 feet at all.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, sitting down with Freddie and his 2 young sons, at that time, he was telling us this episode, which we had on audio tape with his permission, and with his sons telling it. You could clearly see this was something strange. This was something bizarre. I mean, it's almost as bizarre as the other one, which was at the Castle Carry Viaduct. And we had a gentleman driving towards the Castle Carry Viaduct. I think his name was Ray Prosek. And this is a very big expanse of arches. And as he was driving towards it, he became aware of a large black triangular craft hovering about 20 feet above the surface of this viaduct. So he's slowing down the car and he's looking around about him, and other cars were slowing down. And you could see the drivers of the car peering through their windscreen up at this viaduct, you know. Yeah. And then this singular triangular object was then joined by a second similar triangular object, and they were point to point above this viaduct. And then as one rose up into the sky, the other one rose up as well. And I mean, this is part and parcel with these large black triangular craft that's been sighted throughout the world. So to have them in Bonnybridge as well was equally unusual, yeah.
I mean, there's one. I mean, this is the thing, you know, a lot of some of these early cases from 92 are very different, Malcolm, as well. There doesn't seem to be any uniformity to going on here. I love the Mary Matheson case from towards the end of 92, where she got fed up watching it and thought, oh, well, I've watched it for 5 minutes and nothing much is happening now, so I'm going to bed. Which kind of is one of those strange things that you come across sometimes, that people, regardless of the fact they're seeing something inexplicable, sometimes they seem to be rather, well, I'm off now, I've had enough. And you see this occasionally in other cases where people see something very odd and they suddenly go, I'm going to go to bed instead.
It's so true, Paul, it's so true. And that's not just in Bonnybridge, that's the world over. People know that they're looking at something bizarre. They know they are. And then after a period of time, they get fed up and away they go. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, we had a young boy who, one of the stories in the book as well, there was a young boy who ran into his house and he said to his mum and dad, Mum, there's a car in the sky. And of course, the parents are laughing at him. Oh, what are you talking about, a car in the sky? And as the parents went out just to pacify their child, he pointed up into the sky, and there, in the sky, what looked like a boxed car, you know, the shape of a car. And it wasn't a kite, it wasn't a drone, it wasn't an aircraft or anything of that description. And they watched it for a period of time, and then it just silently moved away from the area. And you've got to remember as well, now that I've mentioned drones were not a big thing back in 1992, 1993, absolutely not. They may well have been in America and stuff, but clearly not in the Central Belt. And, I mean, this is just another peculiar shape, this box shape, to go with the other shapes that's been seen flitting about the Stirlingshire skies.
When did you and Billy begin to sort of consider starting Skywatchers there, Malcolm? Was that something that kind of progressed naturally, or was this something that you thought, we're getting so many reports on such a regular basis that the chances are, if we start doing these regularly, there's a good chance we're going to start spotting stuff? Because this is the other thing about Bonnybridge and some of these 1990s sightings is there's a lot of footage, which is quite remarkable for the time, because as we say, this is the early 90s. The only thing anybody would have is the video camera. I mean, you couldn't often go to a family party in the 80s and 90s, Malcolm, without some uncle wanging out his VCR portable video recorder and start filming everything like he was the next Spielberg.
Yeah, and also in those days, before the proper cameras, you had to send your spool into the chemist to get it developed. So you had to wait. Yes. The photographs you took was the photograph you took. You couldn't redo it. It was as you took it.
Yes.
So you're right. But skywatching, oh yes, I mean, skywatching played a big, big part of SPI and our members attending skywatches over the years. And we still do. Even today, we still go up there. And it's funny because there were a number of laybys in the Bonnybridge area. Well, when I say Bonnybridge area, the farmers' fields, on the moors behind the town. But now a lot of them have been filled in. And I remember we were up doing a sky watch, and there was about 15, 20 cars on the grass verge, and it didn't leave much room for any singular car to get by. And we soon saw this big shape bounding down this farm track, this big shape. I went, oh no, who's this? And this big burly farmer's lady, this wife, came out. Who's responsible for all these cars out here? And each to a man pointed and turned to me and went, him, to me, Mr. Robinson. And I went, thanks, guys. So we had to do a runner and move all our cars from there. But there is a site, there is the Wheel Camp and Caravan site near Bonnybridge where we go to now. And that has a fantastic sky watching area. You're very elevated, you know. And according to the proprietor of the Wheel Camp and Caravan Park, there was a UFO landed there a few years ago, so much so that to capitalise on the fact, he's actually got a white sign. I think there's a photograph in my book, actually. There's a white sign saying UFO landing site. And we've taken members of SPI up there, and we've taken film crews up there as well. Never seen a thing, admittedly. Well, I tell a lie. We had a lady called Tress Blair, and this lady claims that she can see spirits, she can see aliens, etc. And I'm not going to doubt that. I'll never, ever doubt anybody without proving for my own integrity that they're telling the truth. During a sky watch, this one admittedly was at Deckment Woods, she says, oh, don't you see them? I says, see what? She says, there are two small grey beings standing next to that bush. And I couldn't see them. Nobody else could see them bar her. But that's not to say that they were not there, because we all know that cats and dogs and certain animals can see a visible spectrum, hear things much more clearly than mankind. So there is this perception that some people are finely attuned to see things more than others. We had a sky watch last year at Cairnpapel Hill near Bathgate, where our psychic medium, Stephen Bird, saw not only a UFO in the fields about less than a quarter of a mile away, but two small creatures as well. And so nothing surprises me now when we do sky watches.
I mean, there are so many remarkable things about these early days that really made me chuckle a lot. I mean, this is the great thing about yourself and Ron collaboration on this, because you were clearly dealing with a lot of odd things. I mean, these Americans that won a prize that was being advertised in American cinemas for the release of Fire in the Sky, which is the Travis Walton biopic, as it were. Yeah. And they'd won a prize to come visiting hotspots all around the world, which sounds like a brilliant prize for anybody to win who's interested in this subject. And therefore, you and Billy ended up having to sort of take these guys out to Bonnybridge.
That's correct. We were in Bonnybridge, we're in Deckment Woods, a scene of another encounter, and all over various hotspots in Scotland. And what a great prize for these two guys to win. Being flown over to United Kingdom and in Scotland to visit various locations. These were lovely guys as well, and they were quite educated in the ufological subject. You know, they weren't just prize winners who didn't know nothing about it. The prize itself was to do with UFOs. I can't remember now what it was, but the subject matter was ufology. They won that prize. They got flown over to Scotland, and Billy and I and John Jenkins, another Scottish ufologist, took them around. We asked them questions, we answered their questions, and it was a great day, really good day.
When you look at the body of evidence, I mean, obviously, one of the criticisms, this is one of those strange things that often gets put forward in cases like this, is that people just accused Billy of making it all up, which the body of evidence and the number of witnesses is one of those things that, well, he would have to have convinced everybody in the town, it would seem, to join in on his hoax here. And people say, oh, well, it's a publicity stunt to increase tourism. Now, with the greatest of respect, I think Bonnybridge would struggle against some of Scotland's more notable vistas and locations, Malcolm, despite the fact there's some incredible historical sites there. It seems to be often the standard sort of excuse put forward for a rash of sightings like this. Well, they're just trying to bring tourists in, which I think is a remarkable leap of faith.
Yeah, I understand anybody's comments in regards to that, and it's an accusation that I've and Billy have been labelled against us over the years, and that's absolutely fine. We can come to expect that now. But by the same token, whilst these sightings were happening, Councillor Buchanan did feel that there should be some form of visitor centre or something in the town, because Bonnybridge was being visited by people from all over the world. And what were they to do in Bonnybridge? Nothing at all. Nothing for them to see or do anything. So Billy and I felt there should be some form of interactive museum or something where people can come in and go through all the press reports, press buttons, and they'll get all news, television clips, etc. And we were hoping through the funding of the Lottery Commission that maybe that's something that may happen, if not in the future, because we need the town of Bonnybridge needs injection. It needs some tourism, but it's not because of the UFOs. Some people may say then that Billy was trying to capitalise on that. Well, maybe there's a small percent that might be true, in the sense that he wants people to come to Bonnybridge. Equally, he's been over to see the mayor of Roswell in New Mexico. We all know what happened in there in 1947. And the reason Billy was over in Mexico at Roswell was to see if we could twin the towns of Bonnybridge and Roswell. Sadly, that's never came to fruition, but who knows, But certainly a kind of visitor centre would have been something we would have liked to have happened. Because certainly over the years with other UFO sites, we've got a stone cairn and a plaque and signage in Deckman Woods for visitors. And Rendlesham Forest, for instance, they have their big UFO in the forest, this big model, they have signage, etc. So it's only fair that people who are travelling great distances have something at the end of their journey to maybe sit down and look at. And but yeah, it's just, you can't win sometimes. People think it's all publicity. But no, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah. For me, it seems like common sense, really, because you only have to look at what is around Loch Ness and the visitors centre. That's just had a massive overhaul, Malcolm. I've not obviously been for quite a long time, so I'm not sure if you've visited since it's all reopened and everything. But they clearly, even in this day and age, it still brings people in from all around the world. And yes, regardless of Nessie's existence, it's one of the most stunning locations you can visit in Scotland. It is stunningly beautiful, as is most of the Highlands, in my opinion. Things like this, like you say, with the success you had with the Bob Taylor monument in Deckman Woods, I'm still struck sometimes when I've visited places that are primarily well known because of something weird happening. Todmorden a prime example of that, which is quite weird because Todmorden has now become some kind of sort of alternative area where they have regular UFO groups meeting there. There's a beautiful folklore centre done there. There's a lot of sort of alternative lifestyle going on. People are moving to that particular location. It's in a beautiful part of Yorkshire. It's close to Manchester. It's fantastic. And yet there's nothing there about Alan Godfrey's case at all. I've walked up and down the street where it happened. I've been to the field where the cows were found locked in for some reason. For me, and it's not just because I'm a bit of a lover of all things strange, I think sometimes you've got to embrace your history and your folklore, because you only have to look at, say, Bungie down south with the famous black dog sighting, Malcolm. They talk about that, and that's something that happened, 600-700 years ago. And people go there to see the scars on the door and all that. And so for some reason, there's not many locations here in the UK that seem to embrace their weirdness, even though most historical places are known for ghosts and all kinds of strange things. Why are we not celebrating weird UFO locations as well?
Well, we should. Any committee of any given town should look at the history of that local town, irrespective of some of it may be strange. Alan Godfrey, I know him well, lovely, lovely man. His ex-police officer, his sighting, there should be something in the record books or on a placard or something in the town to commemorate that sighting. When we look at Mothman in Point Pleasant, there's a big statue Mothman. You mentioned with Presley Boulevard and stuff like that. There's model Elvises when you can go into the shops, etc. So people are capitalising on that. Same with Loch Ness. You mentioned Loch Ness. There's many models of Nessie, etc. And that's good for tourism. That's good for the industry because it's based, maybe loosely, but it's based on something in that particular area at Loch Ness. For me personally, it's one of the most beautiful spots in Scotland. It's very, very dear to my heart. And as you probably know, I was fortunate enough to go down in a submarine back in 1994. So I'm one of the few guys in the world to have seen the floor of Loch Ness through a portal of a submarine. But getting back to the main point is, yes, I mean, there is all these locations throughout the world who has a fantastic history of ufology, of ghostly paranormal phenomena, and maybe some of these places should be recognised by signage or even a plaque on a wall or something like that, because it's all for the betterment of knowledge. And that's what I'd like to see, yeah.
It certainly is, like you say. I mean, Point Pleasant, I've spoken to many people that have visited it. For a lot of people, it's the only reason they go there. They would have no other reason to visit that place in West Virginia, Malcolm, if it wasn't for what happened in 1966, 1967. And the town has embraced that because it brings people in. There are thousands of people that visit there every year for their festival. And so there are certain other places up and down the States where they've kind of embraced that. And we have a real love of folklore here. We have a bloody cheese rolling competition here where people can get, people come from all around the world to try and win that roll of cheese, Malcolm. Yeah. We have all kinds of folklore. We have Morris dancing. I mean, here in Sheffield on Boxing Day, we have a sword dance that goes on every year. Essentially, for me, these are quintessential parts of folklore. And I think sometimes people use the term folklore and they just presume that it's an old story, or it's just simple people trying to find an explanation for something they don't understand. And I think these days, these things are now crossing the boundaries from stories to become our modern folklore, are they not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, when we look at another strange case in America, Pascagoula,
yes,
1973, with the help of Philip Manto and some colleagues, they managed to get signage up placed at the scene where the Pascagoula abduction transpired. And so that's great as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We should be commemorating numerous crazy stories of folklore and a whole range of different things by the placement of signage or plaques, etc. And I've always wanted to go down to visit the small town or village of Cottingley in Yorkshire. I know this whole story is a fake. We know that, the little girl seeing things, the fairies and stuff. But I always wanted to go and see that little brook and the houses and stuff like that. And but yeah, that one was a fake, although in her latter years, it was either Frances or Elsie claimed that they did indeed see fairies, and they just manufactured these fairy models to back up what they were already honestly seeing, but you don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I've always thought that the most perplexing mystery of Cottingley is who got those photos done, because somebody quite well-to-do got those pictures in hand somehow, Malcolm. And I think when we find out who was behind that, I think some of us may not be surprised, depending on how much we know about spiritualism in the 1920s in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the camera was given to one of the girls by the father, the box brownie camera, and they took it out to the beck. And as the story goes, the actual models of these fairies were from the Princess Mary's gift book. They cut out these little fairies and they added wings and added legs to them. And Frances, I think it was Frances, was a painter. She was a very, very good painter and a good artist. So she painted these little figurines and with a hat pin stuck it on the mossy bank. And of course, when the scientists and everybody says, "Oh, but I can see movement there," it was just the wind moving these little paper images. The sad thing is, it's Oliver Lodge falling for this story. It's very, very sad that he fell for that. But again, that's endemic into the history and culture of West Yorkshire, the Cottingley fairy story. And whilst some would agree that maybe it is a hoax, that maybe it's put Cottingley on the map. It's put that little village on the map.
It certainly has, because it's a very tiny place in West Yorkshire that, unless you know where it is or you're from Yorkshire, I mean, even people from Yorkshire would be surprised to struggle to find it, because it's sort of halfway between Leeds and Bradford. So it's one of those blink and you'll miss it places, but it's there if you can find it. I suppose, before I let you leave me, Malcolm, what's next for Bonnybridge? What's going on? Are Skywatchers still going on? Is the community still, as you touched on earlier, I think, is it the fact that the community have got so ambivalent to what's going on that they're not reporting these outside of their community, or they're only going through the channels they can trust because they've seen everything that happened in the past? They've seen people turn up and call them liars, hoaxers and idiots. Is the community still as interested in what's going on? And has anybody come to some conclusion as to why Bonnybridge? What's going on in this particular area that seems so attractive to strange things in the sky?
Yeah, that's the $1,000,000 question, Paul. I mean, all we can safely say with any honesty is that Bonnybridge is, in UFO speak, a hotspot or a window area, which attracts a higher concentration of UFO reports than anywhere else. We've got it in Gulf Breeze, and we've got it in the Pennines and various areas throughout the world, in Nullarbor Plains in Australia. There's hot spots, more so admittedly around naval bases or army installations. We know about the Minuteman missile, where they got shut down by UFOs that was hovering above that base. And but there's nothing in the Bonnybridge area. There's no naval station, no army bases, or nothing of any great significance in the area, which some would presume would attract some kind of foreign advocacy to the area, for want of a better word. But over the years, as you know, we've plugged away. We've been in touch with the British government. We sent petitions to John Major, Tony Blair, David Cameron, Gordon Brown. And just a couple of years ago, Councillor Billy Buchanan and I were down to see Rishi Sunak, who was the Prime Minister at the time. And we went to Whitehall, we went to, we were all over the place. And still, we're none the wiser. Do we expect the British government to truly and honestly come clean on the subject? I doubt very much that will be the case, to be honest with you. But when I look back at Bonnybridge, it played a big part in my life and Ron Halliday's life. We had the big conference at Falkirk Town Hall in 1994, where over upwards of 800 people were there, with about 200-300 people locked out. I gave a lecture, Philip Mantle gave a lecture, we had the music of Scottish rock group CE4. So it's seen a lot of activity over the years. But to answer your question about what is going on now, yes, there's still sightings. They're not being reported as much as they were. People are reluctant to come forward. People have had enough of it. They want the town to go back to what it was, a quiet, unassuming town. It's a lovely wee place, Bonnybridge. It's absolutely fantastic. But we'll continue. The Skywatches will continue. The investigations will continue. And we can only hope that the subject itself will unmask itself to truly show us what truly is going on. And we could say that for any given UFO sighting or hotspot anywhere in the world. It's up to the enigma that is behind this elusive UFO phenomena to truly unmask itself. And we're in 2025. People have been saying this for years. Will we ever get an answer to this wonderful mystery? I can only cross my fingers and say, let's hope so.
I mean, finally, as you've mentioned earlier, and as anybody with an interest in ufology will be really aware of, Malcolm, obviously the US government seem to be doing a very sort of focused and intense disclosure discussion series at the moment in regards to congressional hearings and witnesses, even though it seems to be specifically dealing with a particular tranche of the phenomenon.
Yeah.
Are you surprised that the British government seem to be absolutely uninterested in doing anything like this, or even discussing it at that kind of level? Because I never thought I'd see the US government have a congressional hearing, regardless of the reasons. And yes, a lot of it's flim-flam, and why are we only focusing on certain aspects of it rather than the whole phenomena? Does it still surprise you in this day and age, after everything that's happened, the numerous, not just Bonnybridge, there are countless places all over the UK that have had strange sightings going back that have involved military craft on manoeuvres from, especially in the 50s, there were tons of stuff going off on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Why are they so ambivalent to this subject? They don't want to seem to discuss it under any circumstances.
And there's the rub, you're quite right. And thank you very much, Paul, for saying that, because the British government don't really want to get involved in any head-to-head talks with ufologists about what's going on across the British Isles. When you look across the pond to America, you're right, the US had the congressional hearings. There's even a panel of NASA experts with some astrophysicists involved looking at these sightings. And of course, the 2004 USS Theodore Roosevelt case was fantastic, where they dispatched these F-18 Super Hornets in pursuit of these objects that they described as tic-tacs, go fast and gimbal. That was off the California coast. Now, they've obviously now released that footage, and they're saying that these objects are making manoeuvres that if it was a pilot on board an object such as that, they would instantly die because of the G-force. So the implications regarding these Navy sightings are huge, more so because it shows that the US government have lied to us for years, saying that there are no UFOs. So did the US government have an agenda as to why they lied to us? Was it to protect humanity as they knew what was going on? Were they perhaps in collusion with other life forms in an exchange of technology? So whoever has the advanced alien technology would surely control the Earth. Now, that's purely speculation on my part, but it does bring in some pertinent questions. You know, questions like, what would happen if we had open contact with an alien species? Does the American government, or for that matter, any government, have protocols regarding any first contact with an alien species? And are we truly aware of the implications of an ET presence on Earth on religion? What would that do to religion? And what would an open disclosure do to the various churches of the world? Probably, I would say, Paul, the most alarming thing would be the use of any alien technology falling into one country's hands. Would that one country then control the world? So I could go on with all these illustrations of the what-if scenario. And that's all it is, what if, because we truly don't have all the answers at the moment. All we can safely say is what I said at the top of the show is, we are dealing with something real. It's always been with us.
Yes, exactly. So, Malcolm, what's next for you? And do you have another project in the fire? I mean, I'm asking myself a question I probably know the answer to, knowing you as I've got to over the years. A man known for spinning multiple plates at the same time. And going forwards, what's got your hackles up in regards to investigation?
Well, going forward, I'm giving a lecture on alleged alien photographs. It's photographs allegedly of greys, reptilians. I'll be giving that on June the 14th at the Queen Margaret Union in Glasgow University. It's the Scottish UFO and Paranormal Conference. We'll have different speakers there as well, including Ron Halliday. And we're continuing with our sky watches. These will be taking place at various UFO hotspots across Scotland, namely Bonnybridge, of course, Decmont Woods, the A70, and various other locations, Cairn-Papel Hill as well. So there's a lot going on. As far as my next book project, quarter of the way through that, its working title is going to be Testimonies of the Supernatural. And this will encompass cases given to me by people all over the world, because my previous books are all been kind of more or less to do with the United Kingdom. So this will encompass stuff from all over the world. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. I'm still excited in this subject. I guess I always will be, Paul. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful subject to be involved with, and it's going on now just upwards of 45 years, coming up 50 years.
Brilliant. Well, Malcolm, where can everybody get a book? And if they've got an experience or a sighting that they want to share with you, how's the best way to get hold of you, sir?
Yes, to get in touch with me, please email me at the following email address. That's MALCOM malkyspi@yahoo.com. So that will read malkyspi@yahoo.com. And you can get my books on Amazon, combination of UFO books, paranormal, Loch Ness, etc. But the Bonnybridge book, folks, that's the one. You got to get that on your shelf.
Brilliant. Well, thank you as always for your time and your conversation. It's always a pleasure spending time in your company, Malcolm. Thank you again. And I look forward to the next time we speak. And I wish you and Ron all the best with the latest book. And you take care.
Thank you very much, Paul. A pleasure.